It's 4:30. Today is Wednesday, March 27th. This is the Water Quality Management Committee meeting. All board members are present. The usual cast of characters are here, but we have a special guest tonight, which is Kristen Weir, who's from Webner. And she's first on the agenda to talk about their Reserve Coastal Training Program and to see how that segues in with our interests and or maybe drum up some support.
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, I'm the Coastal Training Program Coordinator at Wacoit Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. I have a little presentation, just a few slides, just to get us oriented to what the Coastal Training Program is, in case you're not familiar with it, but I assume that a lot of you are.
I hate to interrupt you.
Yes.
Is that board for you or is it just in the way?
I was just looking so I could see Ken as I'm talking.
You didn't bring that in?
She brought it.
I did bring
Oh,
it.
you did?
I will
Okay.
use it at the end.
Sometimes we get strange things in here.
Okay. So I just wanted to start off with all the logos that you're looking at. So like I said, I'm from the Coastal Training Program. Oh, I'm using the wrong mouse here. And Wacoit Bay is a National Estuarine Research Reserve. The Coastal Zone Management Program from NOAA established these reserves. There's about 30 across the U.S. And along with NOAA, we partner with DCR. They're the ones that actually help co-manage the land on the reserve and help support staff. And then we have at the reserve our Friends group, who also offer us a lot of support. So what is the goal for today's meeting? Why am I here? I would like to better understand the Water Quality Management Committee's training needs because...
Kristen, advance the slides on the other computer, not
Thank
yours.
you. Thank you. What's the goal of this meeting? So yeah, like I was saying, the Coastal Training Program offers trainings to coastal decision makers. So the WQMC is my target audience, and so I have a couple things on the docket that's coming up. We're actually bringing back the Cape Coastal Conference, which gathers coastal decision makers on Cape Cod around emergent themes. So we're going to hold this on June 18th in Hyannis. We'll be sending a save the date very soon. And this conference will be on the topic of water quality in general, and I'm trying to nail down subtopics under that very large umbrella. So I'm looking for your opinion on what's topical right now. One of the things that I have heard for folks is that the watershed permit planning could be a key topic to include at this conference or as a separate training even. So I would like feedback on how the Coastal Training Program might be able to support you guys as you're going through that process. And then just something else to keep in mind, if you have other ideas either now or later and want to contact me, I'm in the process with my entire reserve. We're creating a 5-year management plan, which basically just means that all the sectors, so education, research, stewardship, coastal training, are forming their goals and priorities for the next 5 years. So I'm looking to do that with my trainings as well. Okay, so Coastal Training Program. So I just wanted to define some of the terms that I've been using, like coastal decision makers. Like I mentioned, that is my target audience, and it's defined very broadly as individuals or groups who are regularly making decisions about coastal resources. And today, I'm focusing on local officials because that historically that is why the CTP was created, to help inform and support folks in those roles that typically have high turnover, and there wasn't an organization that was targeting those those folks. And all of these trainings are around coastal issues, again, defined really broadly, a wide variety of topics that affect coastal communities. Some examples could be things that are related to marine waters, fresh water, since that's included in coastal watershed management, land use, fisheries, that sort of thing. But today, we're focusing on water quality given your expertise. And then the CTP, again, offers coastal trainings and technical assistance. These can take many forms, more like learning opportunities, like workshops, roundtable discussions, case studies. There's also some technical assistance or directed services that the CTP can offer. I think maybe some of the most helpful trainings could be around process skills, sort of like the facilitation basics training that we just offered, that two of you were able to attend. And so today, I just wanted to actually give you all the floor to discuss topics that you might like training on. And I would specifically like feedback on the watershed permit topic, but other emergent issues are free game. I'm just going to use the board here to record reactions and ideas, to keep track of those. But I will answer any questions you have. This is a picture I came across in the CTP folder, because again, I'm new. I'm only 6 months into the role, and it actually highlights Dr. Ken Foreman, and I don't know exactly what you're doing, but I'm assuming it was related to the PRB that was installed at Webner. So does anyone have any questions that I can answer? Yeah, Jordan.
Maybe I just give you a little overview of where we as a committee are
Yeah.
currently.
Yep.
So, the town of Falmouth has done the notification about 18 watershed plans that have to be prepared. And our Kristen R. has been, at each meeting, or every other meeting, has been going through individual watersheds to, kind of benchmark where we are, where some numbers are, and what some of the challenges and opportunities are. So, I'm not saying we're very savvy, but we've worked on, we've got 4 or 5 of them out of the 14 so far?
2.
Huh?
2. We've done 2.
Well, yeah.
Horns and
4 or
fiddlers.
5. Anyways, speaking just for myself a little bit, I'm very curious as to how some of the other Cape communities, because there was really an initial choice of whether or not you were going to file a notice of intent or allow regulations to roll in, and sort of other communities are, last I knew, Bourne did not file notices of intent, for example. So, where are other communities at in terms of watershed planning might be valuable.
Yeah, actually, that was going to be my question to you, Kristen, is are you visiting other towns to get similar input?
Yes, I am. I talked to Ashley Fisher at Mashpee, and I'm trying to nail down a meeting with folks in Sandwich as well. But one of the things that we did talk about at Webner was to create maybe a resource that so I would ask and survey all the towns, and they would be able to check where they are in the process. Yeah. So I think that's great to hear that would be of value.
And then internally, again, we have a little bit of a working group involving Ken and Jordan, looking at, what sort of water quality monitoring have we done, and what should we be considering as we step forward and we get, every 5 years, have to have certain data or have a plan in place. So that's another element of the plan that'll be created. So be curious as to, how other people are gonna get water quality, and what I mean, we have 14 estuaries, so there's a lot of resources that are gonna be needed.
Yeah. Are you saying how would monitoring happen before creating the plan, or how would you incorporate it? Could you just clarify?
Probably both.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a project to widen the inlet at Bourne's Pond that recently got to a point where it's permitted enough to go out to get a contractor to do the work. And somebody on the board, probably you, Steve, right, suggested, you know, do we have a baseline? You know, how do we know that the inlet widening's gonna get the benefit that we expect it to have? So that precipitated a conversation over the last couple of meetings about how do we monitor, what do we monitor, who's monitoring what? Where do we have other third parties helping us out and maybe trying to make it more? No, I keep seeing these watershed plans as an opportunity to look at things that we've gone through to get to where we are now and say, did the answers that we came up with 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, are they still the right answers, and are there other things we should be doing? And, I know nothing about science, but I do like to listen to other people that know something about science, so it does appear that Ken and Jordan have some thoughts on what may or may not be useful information to gather. I think we'll hear a little bit more later in this meeting when I put Amy on the spot to talk about, you know, we have got a proposal for doing baseline monitoring at Bourne's Pond, which will go ahead before we have the whole watershed permit in place if we find the funding sources. So, but again, you know, the regulations that came out don't really tell you what you have to monitor and measure. They say you need to monitor and measure and show that you're making progress. So, a little bit of an open question.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of talk to the flip side of that monitoring, and that means the paucity of data that we do have, and it's not peculiar to Falmouth, means that our benchmarks are based on modeling, right, which really borders on the abstract. And you run different models, you get sometimes widely varying results. And I'm thinking, because I don't understand modeling that well, at least not the more complex ones, and maybe some sort of very focused workshop by a couple of modelers, or maybe someone from the Cape Cod Commission that does these things could tell us the pluses and minuses of different approaches, because that's, I find frustrating, you know, just trying to figure out what each household is dumping into the groundwater on the Cape, for starters, because you look at different models, you very different numbers, different assumptions. So some kind of, I'd call it a modeling workshop, maybe that was.
So comparing models.
Right, yeah, comparing modeling approaches, you know, if we use this approach, anyway, that's just my very personal issue with me, I think.
I guess I'd like to add to that, and to sort of the water quality or habitat and water quality monitoring piece in general, is having the regulators in the room to talk about this too would be super helpful.
Yeah,
So having a
definitely.
workshop where we actually bring in DEP or, you know, whoever is gonna be reviewing these, plans could be very helpful. And then, you know, whether or not that happens with a lot of the towns on Cape or just a few of the towns on Cape, like that information could be distributed and shared across the towns.
Great.
To follow on that,
Yes.
insight into DEP and how it functions, how it's structured, who we need to reach. Yeah,
I'm trying to figure that out right now.
right. Well, when you figure it out, let the world know.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But that's, yeah, that's a good,
Yeah. I think one of the problems with modeling is the train has left the station 10 years ago. And we have a model which we're being held to, which is the MEP
Right.
studies. And the various towns have thought about arguing about that model over the years. And I think that's a battle we don't want to re-enter. I think that's what we're stuck with, what they've given us. I think we all know what a healthy pond looks like. and the mathematics of it are probably not worth rehashing a great deal.
But, John, don't we have a responsibility to make a best effort to kind of fix things?
No.
And if we're applying the Band-Aid to the wrong part of the body, we're not gonna get the result we want.
You know, to add to that whole train of thought, I think that's key. You know, we're thinking of ways to measure, what to measure, but we don't know definitively what is the performance metric that DEP will have to say, yes, Falmouth, you've done the right thing, mission accomplished, or hell no, you wasted all this time and money and you didn't get to the goal. Well, tell us what the goal is. What are the water quality parameters you are going to look for Falmouth to meet? And we've got more estuaries than anybody in the Commonwealth that we are under an edict to clean up. But what does that mean? How do you model towards a goal when you don't know what the goal is? And it's not just Falmouth, it's all the communities on the Cape, but I also think it would be important to involve Martha's Vineyard. They are not currently under the state decrees, but they will be. They are already in Tisbury mandating IAs in an area, it affects about 1,500 households, so they're jumping ahead of the fact that the state will put a mandate on them. But if you don't know what the goal is of that mandate and what that performance level that they expect you to achieve, you'll never get there. And they can keep moving it and say, well, you didn't get there. Well, hey, wait a minute, you never gave me the goal. And I think there's economies of scale and cooperation between the communities, all on the Cape certainly, maybe other parts of the South Shore that might be impacted. Wareham, I think, just got their TMDL requirements put upon them. But how do you get there if you don't know where you're trying to get? And if you all use a similar model, maybe you can save some money and time to get to that same goal. So I think a collaborative effort between these communities that are impacted with DEP involvement is key.
I have a logistical question that I don't have the direct answer to it. To the extent that multiple board members go to this event on June 18th, we may have to post that as a meeting of the board, otherwise we can't deliberate. Which means that it's, you know, then it becomes a publicly open meeting.
Yes, so, yeah, we can talk about that more. I'm not sure what was done in the past, because the conference has been going on since 2013, and it is really targeted towards board members.
I'm just flagging, I think
Okay.
that we probably need to.
Well, to be on the safe side, we should just do it.
Yeah, well, I think this is a case where I would try to get to town council or somebody and ask the question, or.
Depends, what do you mean by deliberate? I mean, being educated and asking general questions.
I don't want to find out after the fact that we've tripped
Yeah.
up ourselves.
Yeah,
Okay?
they just went through this with the ZBA, I think it was. 3 selectmen showed up at that meeting.
Yeah, and the other lo-
Charged with violating the open meeting law.
Yeah, yeah.
Correct.
And the other logistic is, what's the Stony Brook date? Is that same week?
Maybe.
Yeah, I thought it was like.
I think it is.
Is this a Monday? June 18th, a Monday?
It's not a Monday, I believe. It's a Wednesday, Tuesday or Wednesday.
The 18th is Tuesday.
Yeah. So I think the next, I recall that it was June, anyways, Stony Brook is running a program to
June
cover what
12th.
they've been doing. Huh?
June 12th is Stony Brook.
The 12th?
Yep.
Okay. One or two of us might make the journey down to Long Island to go attend this thing, so just wanted to be sure we were looking at the same day.
Yes.
I just wanted to touch briefly on what John said about the modeling. I think one of the tricky pieces about the modeling conversation and the, you know, generally the thresholds that we've been given and everything is that they're old, right? And we have had temperature changes in our estuaries since they were determined. So one of the parts of that modeling piece, you know, question that I have is, okay, so we meet our threshold, but it turns out that's not good enough to improve the water, the estuary, because the temperatures are
Climate is
3
changing,
degrees warmer, and it actually needs to be like, several, points or whatever lower to actually, let the estuary recover. So I see it less as like a division or deviation from the MEP, and more like, how do we make the MEP work for us today? And make it like, so something that we can actually realistically achieve. Something like that.
Go ahead, Steve.
I agree with that, except I'm glad to hear you say that the MEP model you feel is the opposite of conservative, right? You think it's not adequate. It's not
That's
overly
right,
safe.
that's correct. I think
But-
with
but then-
temperature,
right,
it'll be
but then that
yeah.
means it works well with adaptive management, because you don't waste any of your resources, except when there's economy of scale. You're doing a little bit less than is necessary, and then you watch and see how close you get, and then your second round
Yes,
can be
although-
that much more accurate.
If we continue to like do a phase, wait for it, and see if it
Takes a
works,
long time.
we'll have
Yes.
many more decades of
Way
poor
too
water
long.
quality
Right.
and.
But
nutrient
there
load.
is the trade-off between
Yeah.
falling short and overspending.
So we've given you some feedback.
Yep.
I don't want to cut you short, but I do want to find out what the next step is or what you need from us now.
Yeah, so I think this aligns with what I've been hearing from other folks, so that's great. I don't know if we have time to brainstorm any other ideas for what you would like to see at the coastal conference other than watershed permits.
I would tell you that the way this committee tends to work is,
Yeah.
somebody like you comes in, you've kind of identified something.
Yeah.
These folks are pretty good about coming back to a meeting 2 weeks or whatever, saying, maybe this is something, maybe this is something, maybe this is something. So we can feedback stuff to you over the next couple of weeks. Does that work?
Yeah.
And Kristen, will you be doing the agenda? Who's developing the agenda for the coastal conference?
I am.
You are, okay, because I can already think, maybe I'll send you a note or something. I've got a couple ideas already for tightly focused and a broad brush approach
Yes.
to different things that might work.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll get back to you.
Do you think you will be able to get DEP people to participate?
That's it's a top goal, like, I'm hoping, I found out that the person involved in, or spearheading this retired, so I'm not sure, I'm in the works, so it's,
Yeah, okay.
I will keep you posted.
If there's any way that you can review what they're going to present before you waste the time of 20 or 30 people on it, you would have saved a lot of people hours.
You mean,
In other words, let's say there's a wide spectrum of knowledge and ability within DEP. If we'd like someone who actually knows what they're talking about.
yes, I understand. Yes, I'm gonna be reviewing all the speakers' presentations prior to, so.
And has
I'll
the
be
authority
working
to
with
do
them
something.
make sure it
And
fits.
yes, and as Ken just said, has the authority to do something.
What's that?
And has the authority to do something.
Right.
Right. You can know what you're talking about, but not have any power, so.
Yes, yes, heard.
So, there was a moment in time where the DEP said, we have nitrogen-sensitive zone regulations we want to implement, and we want to come out and hear what you folks think of it. We wound up giving them feedback, and they wound up modifying their regulations somewhat, not as much as some would like. We may be in the situation where, not so much they come in to tell us what they
Oh,
have.
the education goes in the other
I think
direction.
it might be the other way, but we sort of say, we're now this far into it, we have these sorts of, concerns, we feel like the water, so that they listen to what we've got, and we see as issues that we're struggling with to know, that, as people say, if we do something, is it gonna be the right thing? So I think we use this as an opportunity for the right people from DEP to say, we're not asking you to make decisions right now, we want you to hear the things that we as a community are wrestling with to try to figure out how to scope, preparation of these plans. Again, back to, are we preparing the right plans? Are we gathering the right information in the right order, okay? And then give them an opportunity to step away and come back and tell us if we're good or not. I think that's the way I would proceed.
I think even very basic is, we're talking now actively about doing some baseline monitoring of Bourne's Pond. What metrics would they look at? Is it nitrogen? Is it water clarity? Is it whatever? Is it eelgrass percentage? What metrics should we look at and measure now in our baselines as we try to establish it? Because those are the ones we hope to improve and satisfy their requirements. The goal is to clean up the estuaries, but if we don't know how they measure it, we could be baseline monitoring totally useless data, spending a lot of effort, a lot of money doing something that they don't think is worth a darn. So tell us, give us some guidance, give us some suggestions, give us some technical advice, and perhaps even in, your organization has access to resources that can help to define those, and methodology and equipment to, there's a tremendous amount of expertise, people like Ken and Jordan, is monitoring water quality, but is that important to DEP?
Another way of putting it is, we've been up against these questions for quite a few years. And there are some really smart people on this board. If it had been easy to get this information from DEP, we would have gotten it a long time ago. So you've not set an easy task for yourself.
Don't be too discouraging.
I just want her to be alert.
I would say
She's
it'd
gonna
be
pack
great
her
to have
bags and
Pleasant
go.
Bay.
By the way, his middle name is
Talk about their
Ewa.
process.
Yeah, right.
All right. Thank you.
Very much, I
Thank you for coming
appreciate
in.
it.
Thank you, Kristen.
Amy, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Could you give a little discussion on where we are with the Bourne's Pond baseline, the little bit of back and forth that?
Yep.
Not the little bit, but the bigger picture of, Amy said.
Sorry, move that one second.
With,
No, I'm just gonna
Ed
do it up
Ed
here.
Eisner, or what his name, Ed Eisner.
Hi, Amy Lowell, the Town Wastewater Superintendent. Was that scope included in your packet? Okay, so I contacted Ed Eichner, who now has his own business, but he works closely with the SMAST folks who put together, and he was actually a part of the original team that worked on the MEP project. And he forwarded that proposal for Bourne Pond Inlet, for Bourne Pond baseline assessment. Somebody here, I can't remember which wise person, had said, good, Steve, had said that, look, we're
right.
getting ready to widen the inlet to Bourne's Pond for the purposes of water quality improvement, and should we do an updated baseline? Because the MEP report is now many years old. I don't recall exactly when it was issued, but I want to say 2009. It's
I was gonna say '06, but
I
it's
think
back
it's
there.
2003.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, we were all, I trust Kristen more. But the MEP report is, is quite old at this point and was based on data that preceded that date. We have continued to do summer water quality sampling. So we do have annual summer water quality sampling at the Sentinel Station and the other locations that SMAST was originally sampling. And that is the most key parameter to be monitoring, so we do have long-term data for that. But the MEP report included all kinds of other background data that has not been updated for almost 20 years. Ed and the SMAS team forwarded that proposal, which was to review all of the water quality data and provide a summary and a characterization of that, and do additional benthic flux measurements, and do some a bunch of the sort of standard MEP data collection, but update for the summer. It did not include benthic infaunal sampling, which is looking at the snails and the organisms that live on the bottom. Because of the timing, that is usually done in the fall, and his sense was that the inlet widening project, the goal is to be beginning that this fall. So starting with that work. So if that's the case, then they didn't want to do the survey after the disturbance of the bottom. I think my sense would be it'd be a good idea to plan to do that in the fall, and if they do end up getting moving on schedule, then we'll have to set that aside. But we should plan to do it. In any case, I believe so. My sense was that Steve was looking for feedback from the group as a whole, but also he's talked about Ken and Maura had talked about pond monitoring and baseline assessments, and so I don't know if you in particular had time to look at it, but so I had provided some basic feedback on it, including maybe adding the benthic infaunal, maybe cutting the amount of benthic flux work that they do, and also Kristen had provided some good feedback, which is really, we'd asked for a baseline data collection, but we'd like either a proposal from them or a way as a group for the town to evaluate the success of that project. So we'd need an overall plan for how we look at the baseline data and data going forward to decide what the effect of this project was. And that would likely involve modeling. So there's another step to come. But what we were trying to do now was just provide feedback on this proposal. They would, obviously it's work this summer, so if we want to change this scope, we need to provide feedback relatively soon. The one other thing was cost. I have spoken with the engineering department and with Peter McConerty, the head DPW director, about where this could, how this could get paid for, and it is likely that there will be sufficient funds in the Bournes Pond Inlet widening project to cover that. There is not 100% guarantee of that, so we're going to, as they get closer to bid timeframe, we'll have better feedback on that. But that's my assumption as to funding it at this point. I don't think we could allow this cost to go, given that funding source and the uncertainty about the bid cost. I don't think we could expand this an enormous amount right now. I think we'd want to focus it, is a better way to imagine it.
Or prioritize it in case, which would you have to cut first? I mean,
Sure,
which
I
would
think-
you cut first if you had to cut?
Sure, but I think most importantly is just to get the group's feedback.
What is the
on-
overall cost of the?
So I believe you have the proposal, but it was
79,000.
79,000.
Yeah.
No, I meant for the widening.
Oh, 6
So they
million.
don't know yet, because they haven't gone out to bid
It's
yet. But
millions.
Well, I
Yes.
guessed
Millions.
that.
I mean, we get that number, Ken, it exists.
Well, they haven't gone out to bid yet, but they are developing a final cost estimate.
There is an
So,
appropriation, Amy, there's a dollar amount.
yes, there's more than
available.
$10 million left in the appropriation.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That
The early number
is set
was
aside for that.
about 6 million, but I'm sure that's gone up lately.
Yes, there's been a lot
So-
of delay.
Yeah, I mean, the whole money issue, I mean, Amy went to the person who's closest to the project, the town engineer. I'm sure he's got feedback from his
Yeah.
engineers and consultants there. They're working inside some monetary number, and his first reaction was,
Yes,
80,000's gonna be available, but Peter, and he also said, but we won't know how much we really
Right.
have till we bid it.
Right. So, what is their earliest projected start for the project?
For the inlet widening?
Yeah.
Is this fall, so.
But when you say fall, that's,
Yeah, September.
yeah, because, and I don't know, Ed didn't give you any idea what a benthic survey would cost yet, right, did he?
No, but we can get that.
Yeah,
I did tell him we'd be
because
interested.
That the benthic stuff is the most important single, on a temporal scale, intermediate temporal scale bit of data you can gather. Because what's happening there, once the community's established, which it pretty much is in the fall of the year, I think that's why they mostly sample then, they're looking at what's happened in the last several months. It's not a snapshot, is what I'm trying to get at. What you see there is something that's developed over a time frame of weeks and months. And we're only gonna have one shot at getting that data before the inlet's widen. And even if they started widening the inlet, it's not gonna be opening the valve and filling the pond with water. So I would suggest get a firm quote from Ed and throw that in. I'm biased here, of course, because that's my field, and I just feel that, you know, we don't want to miss this opportunity. We only get one shot at this, and it's intermediate in terms of scaling of what the eelgrass distribution is going to show us, because that's on a time scale of years. And we've got something here that can show us something happening on a time scale of weeks and months. And anyway, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, I didn't mention eelgrass. The proposal did include an eelgrass survey. I am pursuing what additional eelgrass background there may be between the MEP work and this project. There was some amount of eelgrass survey done as part of the permitting for this project, and MES department may have something, so I want to, I don't know that it would replace what's in this scope, but certainly when we're doing an evaluation of the impact, we want to have all that data available.
Go ahead, Steve.
I noticed in the scope that Kristen sent around, that it mentioned that there was one sort of survey that it was too late for because it's seasonally done in November, December.
That's it, the benthic info.
Benthic.
Yeah.
And that the project would start in the fall. But when does the actual physical widening occur? Is that the first step? Or do you first move some rocks around which really don't have any effect on the flow?
I don't know.
But you see where I'm going, right?
Yep.
If you found out that the actual widening didn't occur till January, and if the people here, not me, who know what's important along those lines, could do that in November, December.
Agreed.
I'm just gonna suppose, based upon thinking about what it would mean, that,
How you would do it.
yeah, they're closing the road down, obviously, or restricting it to one lane at some point.
Right.
But they're gonna put in the new abutments before they widen the inlet,
That's what I would have
okay?
guessed, yes.
So they're not gonna widen the inlet in September, October, November. Okay?
Okay, so
I
they're.
mean, I'd be very
yes.
surprised. I mean, they've
Right.
gotta get in there, establish a dewatering regime and put footings down and put the new.
So you could conceivably do meaningful before studies in November.
Yes, that's my point.
Yep, I think that's correct.
It is one of the most labor-intensive bits of work they're gonna do, though. Sorting and picking through the benthic samples is very labor-intensive when done properly. So I just would be very interested in seeing what Ed comes back with for a quote on that work, but
Okay.
I think it's very important.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna ask if he's proposed to do so I'm gonna get to this when we get to the monitoring issue, in the next
Did you read the scope?
agenda item, but, is he proposing to do any continuous measurements of oxygen using
Yes.
solids?
Yes.
Okay.
But only 28
Oxygen
days.
and chlorophyll. What?
But only 28 days, only a month, so I would like to see that more than just
Right.
28.
That's exactly the kind of feedback I'm looking for.
Yes, I think that should be through the whole season,
Okay.
starting as soon as possible and continuing
Okay. It's DO and chlorophyll.
Right. And in one location or in two locations?
I don't remember.
Okay, because, again, with the widening, what you're gonna expect to see, I would think, would be, better flushing, right?
Two locations.
Good, so, because that's, I think I just haven't had a chance.
Well,
to-
here they've got 3 locations, 2 inside the pond and 1 in the sound. And I'm looking at the proposal right now, task 3.
Yeah, I don't think it's
Oh, yeah,
necessary.
one in the sound.
1 in the sound.
I'm not sure why they need to measure in the sound, but.
Well, you just got a chance to do it.
The other
But
thing-
anyway, that's what they're calling for, is 3 locations, 2 inshore and 1 offshore.
What about, so you said longer, what time period in the summer is most?
Well, I mean,
You said as long as possible,
I
but,
think you want to capture the seasonal dynamics. They're going to be quite different,
If I had to say, I would say June to September, and if they say we can't do that, then I would say July and August.
okay.
You fair weather sampler.
And Jordan knows what she's talking about.
Didn't
That's-
say anything
yeah.
about December or January.
Okay.
The other thing I'd do is partition the studies into 2 groups, among other ways of partitioning. Things that are gonna change immediately, like the flushing, right? As soon as you widen it, the cubic meters per day is different, and then it stays that way. It's a step change. Which is good to know, and you have to get the before and after. A bunch of your other biological things, again, where I defer to the people that really know, change way more slowly than that.
Yes.
So that even an immediately after measurement is just as good as an immediately before.
That's right.
Because nothing changes that fast. And then some of the dissolved, whatever concentrations, probably are in the group of changing immediately.
Okay. Do you have an opinion about the benthic flux measurements?
I was gonna defer to Ken on that one.
I'm gonna jump in here if I can.
This is more detail than you wanted.
The benthic flux thing, if you go back to the MEP models, they don't rely upon benthic flux. Is that correct? They figure ins and outs,
Well, they do have a section on what they call internal loading from benthic flux, right? So they collected sediment cores, and, they did this like once, and I can't remember quite the season out that they did it at. But if you wanted to make it compatible with MEP, you might look at when did they do it?
Kristen was saying, weren't you, that it wasn't used for the TMDL?
In the TMDL, if the benthic flux in the MEP is negative, they zero it out. They keep the positive benthic flux, but the state zeroes
Right,
out the
there's some
negative.
funkiness with that negative thing.
Right.
And I don't quite remember the details, but the way they did it, it's not sort of the traditional way you would do it.
Right.
But, a lot of the nutrients that enter the water column come from the regeneration on the bottom. And that's annually might be a larger term than the external loading. But it's recycled, so it's constantly churning around.
Yep.
And what you expect is, over time, at least you hope, over time, as you reduce the retention of nutrients in the system, that flux will go down because you'll be removing the organic matter that's
The input.
normally accumulated, that organic matter input.
Would you expect it to also be different from when they did this however many, 20 years ago? Like temperatures or something, would that
Well,
affect
sure.
those fluxes
Yeah,
as well?
you're hot on temperature today.
I always hot on temperature. Like, I
Yeah,
just
I-
don't know if, because I, haven't worked with this kind of data before, how much you would expect that to change.
Well, it's
if
very temperature dependent, the process is very temperature dependent, but short term. So, I don't know how it would work long term, because if it's warmer, maybe you're mineralizing more stuff and you're not accumulating as much in the sediments,
so I brought up the whole benthic flux kind of, where does it sit in the MEP model? Because I'm listening to everybody talk about things and, get more of this, get some more of that, this would be good to have. Amy's gonna need to prioritize some of this stuff
Yeah.
with these folks. So, the question I guess I would put out there is benthic flux baseline like the key variable?
What are they, I'm sorry, I just haven't looked at that because I was so busy preparing for the next agenda item.
Good to hear.
Are they proposing to do a single time point of benthic flux, like collect cores in August and then?
So I believe they were gonna do it the way they did it in the MEP, and I don't
Right.
know the details
It
of that.
says they'll do
It's-
the same thing they
they
did
were
in
gonna repeat.
'02.
Right.
22 years of progress, and we're gonna do it the way we did it.
Well, I don't know, you
and it's-
want comparability, so.
No.
It's cores along these transects, and
Right.
Right.
I think it would be interesting to know.
But if we had to,
that's not the question.
but again, funding's a limitation.
Their idea is to
Yeah, but
duplicate.
you say funding's a limitation, but you're spending $80,000 out of a potentially $7 million or $6 million budget. That's trivial.
Yeah, but
So if you had to
If you
spend-
say that, then anyone who wants to spend 80,000 on anything can say the same thing.
Well,
Exactly, Steve.
but this is an important process. This benthic regeneration is an important process.
Okay.
And it is one that will retard recovery if, you'd like to know how rapidly does it change after remediation.
So we
I'm
shouldn't
gonna-
cut it
I'm gonna-
entirely.
I'm gonna play the devil's advocate though, a little bit more here, beyond the, they've got a lot of money, so there should be plenty of money left over for whatever they want to do. But let me, this started off by Steve saying, there's a model that says we're gonna get so much flushing. How do we know if we're gonna get the flushing that the model predicted? Right?
Right.
We're now
That's a
into.
purely physics
I
problem.
understand that. So his original question to get baseline data was a pretty straightforward thing to do. We decided it would be better to get some key baseline data. And I'm just sitting here, I'm not the scientist. If you're gonna tell me that benthic flux is the most important thing we've gotta go get, then we make it the number one thing we spend the money on. But if
I
it's
wouldn't
number-
make
if
it the
it's-
number one thing, but
it-
I don't think it's trivial, in terms of what is the impact of increasing the flushing? We can assume you're gonna increase the flushing. That's,
But on those long-term things, you guys who know about these parameters have to find out what's the history of, what's the graph look like, where are the points?
So when they did
Going
this-
back the last 20
Right,
years,
when they
what's the
did this
trend
in
and all
Boston
that?
Harbor, when they-
And what do you expect to get 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And does this point right now make a difference?
so different system.
And what question are you gonna
When
ask?
when they upgraded the sewage treatment in Boston Harbor and moved it, the outfall 9 miles offshore, it took 5 years for the sediments to recover in the inner harbor. Now, they were getting a lot, it was a little different kind of problem because they were getting sludge deposition, because they were releasing pretty much raw sewage into the, into the harbor, and they didn't always get the tide right. So sometimes it didn't go out to sea like it was supposed to. But that organic matter loading resulted in very high sediment oxygen demand for, 5 years or so before they saw any improvement.
I think it would be very interesting and important to know how that has changed in 20 years, just with changes in temperatures, changes in occupancy of the houses around the watershed, increased build-out, larger houses. We went through something called COVID not too long ago, and people were living year-round in houses that never happened before. They were seasonal. They became year-round. So you've got a lot more deposition from the human factor. You've got changes in the bird population. I walked along a little pond this week, and I said, gosh, you know what? I don't see Canadian geese like I used to. It used to be covered with them. the road would be slippery with goose poop. It's not anymore. I don't know where the geese went, but they're not there
Orange
in
Pond.
anywhere.
They all went to
Avian
Orange
flu.
Pond.
Well, you know, these are all changes, so now we have a benchmark from 20 years ago from MEP. I think it behooves us to see where it is now, and then see where it is after we widen the inlet. You know, you talk about flushing, a couple of good storms with the narrow inlet make a big difference. Couple of big storms with a wider inlet, oh boy, Katie, bar the door, it's really gonna change how much water's going in and out, and all the things that Jordan and Ken have talked about. Temperature rise might have even improved things, but we don't know unless we measure. So let's measure the dang thing, and if we've got to scramble around and find some additional funding sources, I think with the other things we've talked about, maybe that's a good place to go for
How
some
cost-
SNEP grants, or, I don't know.
How costly was their,
30 grand. For that task.
yeah,
The cores is 30 grand.
Right,
It's one of the most expensive tasks on the
right. That's
proposal.
why, part of why I was asking about it. Plus, it is so highly variable that it's been hard for me to see how you use that data. But,
They're just gonna occupy 10 stations at one point in time, sometime in July and August, right?
I think they're just
they
gonna
take
sample
cores.
once.
what makes it
Yeah.
variable
10
probably
stations
is
Yeah.
the variation in sediments, if you get sandy sediments versus muddy sediments and things. Not so much if, you know, so you could constrain it and just say, just do the muddy sediments.
Amy, I think to get the answer that you want, you have to poll this board and ask each person, if you had to knock, pick a number, 20K, 30K, off of the 80K, which one would each person choose? Then they can't weasel on that. They have
So
to
they're
give
not
you an
proposing
answer.
to do the benthic
Well-
animal sorting, right? They said,
They did not, but I think, Tom was suggesting they should add that. We should add that.
Yeah.
and I would think that would be even more expensive.
I think it is
Yes.
too, but I also want to point out to you that this benthic load of nitrogen and the benthic, and the groundwater loading of nitrogen are the two gorillas in the room,
Right.
right? We've got 12 or 15 years easily worth of nitrogen in our groundwater that's still percolating southward and westward. And sitting already in every one of our estuaries is a highly variable load of nitrogen that sometimes is going back into the water column, and all the evidence is other times it's going back into the sediment and being stored there, and then perhaps being released seasonally or whatever, when that stuff is all bioturbated. So both of those are really important to understand, and we've got I think, a pretty good idea, or maybe not a great idea, but a pretty good idea of what's happening in the groundwater. And this nitrogen loading of the sediments in these embayments is the big question mark. So I'm almost in favor of paying for more data, even if it doesn't answer all of our questions.
Yeah, I'm less worried about the prioritization right now than I am if there is any additional or changes
Yeah.
to what's proposed, additions or modifications. I think we can come up with this is what we would like to do, and then prioritize within that if we need to.
So are they proposing to measure pond level, tide gauge?
Yes.
Yes, they have a tide gauge. They're not doing stream gauge work again under
Well,
this.
you wouldn't necessarily,
You wouldn't affect that with
You-
this,
probably not.
right? So they don't have stream gauge, but yes, they have a tide gauge.
In and out,
And they're doing,
Okay.
they're doing a bathymetric survey as well, which I think is important.
yeah. And are they doing the tide gauges inside and outside?
Yes, actually, there'll be 2 inside the pond and 1 outside.
Okay, perfect.
There you go.
I guess I would just make 2 other comments
Yep.
when you go to clarify with them.
Yep.
On task 1, I don't see anything that says how many samples they're planning on taking. So that would be something to ask. They
Isn't
have how
task
many.
one the water quality?
Yes.
So they're already doing They're gonna, the water quality is already part of what they do every year anyway for us, and it's twice a month. It's like,
It's the Falmouth Pond Watch stuff. They're
Yes.
not collecting,
yeah,
That
Ed's
could
not
also
collecting
be
the
June to
sample, they're just-
September, that would be great. Because if that's just July and August, it might be nice to get a little bit more data for the
Yeah, no, I-
year before we change the hydrology. That would be my recommendation. And
okay.
my
so-
other question.
So the water quality, it would, twice a month, June to September.
I notice they have that they're gonna take some samples along with the SON deployments, and that's great. But I was just curious about like the rest of the year, what they were planning on, like this field season. And then my last question is for task 4, the eelgrass survey. I don't think it says what time of year they're planning on doing that, and I would just caution them to also be careful about, water clarity is probably gonna be an issue for them, even though Bourne's Pond's pretty shallow. So that might be something they wanna also think about doing in the September, October time, would be my guess, but that was my question.
Clarity. Okay. All right,
Amy, thank you.
thank you.
thank you.
So my takeaway is you're gonna check back with them and find out what a couple of extra things cost. Yeah. And the time periods are covered, so.
Yeah, I was gonna, I'm gonna ask them to add more continuous DO and chlorophyll measurement, and so at least 2 months of that.
To extend the time.
Extend the time frame, yes, and to extend the water quality sampling time frame, June to September. Talk about the timing on the eelgrass survey, and add benthic and faunal, and then look at, just talk with them about their prioritization and whether, if we were gonna reduce the quantity of samples for benthic and faunal and benthic flux, what would that look like?
Thank you for the summary.
Great.
Thanks, Amy.
Next on the agenda is to find out where you and Jordan are at with thinking about water quality monitoring strategy.
So, I put together notes from the, maybe I'll just pass those down, from our meeting and expanded on them.
You have an extra one for Amy?
And, yeah, there's extras, there's 10. I made 10 copies. So we met 14th,
I want to just cover like a little procedural thing. So Kristen, or through Amy, since this was not, what we're looking at right now is not distributed with the agenda for other people to have or
No.
to see, and you don't have slides to throw it
I
up
do
on the
not have
screen.
slides.
I can put this on the screen if you want. I grabbed
That would
it.
be probably a little bit helpful, but then I just want to make sure it gets posted to our website as soon as possible for anybody that wants to see it. Sorry.
Right, but it's basically,
Do you have an
No.
extra one there? Yeah.
Oh,
She'll know what it is.
so we met on the 14th of February, and I asked Ann Giblin to join us. She has broad, in addition to being my wife, I will admit she's my wife, but
nepotism.
apart from that, she has broad expertise nationally in looking at these kinds of problems. And leads Plum Island long-term study. So I thought her input would be useful. And the first thing we did, Kristen was in attendance, Jordan, myself, and Ann. As Kristen kind of went over what is currently been the monitoring strategy with SMAST, where about 4 to 6 times a year they go sample in the southern ponds, collecting water samples for nutrients from surface and 1 meter depths, get that right, and also measure chlorophyll, dissolved oxygen, temperature, salinity from surface and 1 meter depths. But those are grab samples, right? So just So it is a nice long-term data set. Eelgrass coverage, she mentioned, is sort of DEP does that every 5 years, some kind of survey. Benthic infauna was repeated for Little Pond, is that correct? And, but we concluded that it's pretty labor-intensive, and the population dynamics could be too variable to yield useful results, so that's a concern. Also noted, and this is another place where Ann's input was useful, Buzzards Bay Coalition has started making continuous measurements of water quality using instruments like the YSI SONS in some of the systems. And so and an important point is that whatever strategy we use, we have to have an approved quality assurance assessment plan so that it carries weight with the regulatory, agencies. So then there's sort of two major components to this monitoring strategy that we discussed. One is, let's look at what the inputs are to the system. And one thought that we had was we could do what we did in Little Pond, which is simply put in a series of groundwater monitoring wells around the perimeter of the pond. That's not super expensive. I think in Little Pond, using student labor, we did it for under $10,000. And twice a year, we get 42 water samples. And that has given us a nice long-term record of how groundwater nutrient concentrations have declined. I mean, we need to, especially in these groundwater-fed systems, have some documentation that whatever was implemented in the watershed has actually affected the inputs. Some thoughts on how best to do that. Aerial thermal imaging surveys, which you can do now with a drone, can show you at certain times of the year where you have high groundwater inputs, because the groundwater is cooler than the surface water in the summer, and in the winter the groundwater is warmer than the surface water, so either season works. And that might sort of identify, okay, we want to put some monitoring wells in these locations. And then the water collected, we can monitor for nutrients, pH, temperature, DO, and so forth. I figured annual cost of a survey based on what, on labor costs and supplies is some, if you do this twice a year, it's about $5,000 to $6,000 per estuary. So there's an upfront cost, could be as high as $20,000 to install the wells, that's labor. And again, this is us doing it at MBL. This is what I'm thinking. If you get a consulting firm to do it, I don't know what they would charge. Possibly, let's see, what's the next? Oh, and then the last bit of this is you can look, especially in the winter seasons, at a salinity mixing curve in the estuary and kind of extrapolate backwards to zero salinity. What's the nutrient level? Because you can think of the estuary as a big mixing bowl. All of the groundwater entering there is sort of, is being mixed up and homogenized in that system. And so any spatial variability in your groundwater collections from the wells is kind of, ameliorated by looking at a mixing curve in the estuary back to zero salinity, in theory. And we've done that for Little Pond, and we find pretty good agreement between the wells and the similarly in West Falmouth Harbor. Okay, so that's looking at inputs, which I hope people will agree with is an important part of any monitoring program. It's not specified in any of the DEP stuff, as far as I know, or any of the MEP stuff at this time. Okay, then we want indicators of ecosystem or estuarine health. And I think, again, in the interest of economizing effort, using these continuous monitoring sondes to measure oxygen, which integrates, change in oxygen, which integrates a lot of processes, integrates productivity, respiration, not by all the photosynthetic organisms, but also all the non-photosynthetic organisms, is a good way to get a handle on how the ecosystem is responding. If there's a lot of excess nutrient input, we expect to have very large excursions in oxygen because there's a lot of plants growing in the summer, then they die, there's a lot of respiration. At night, there's a lot of respiration, and you can see from that graph that it's a very dynamic process. Even within a day, you can go from, being undersaturated with respect to oxygen to being 150% of saturation in the water column. And if you get a cloudy day, you have this downward trend because you're not regenerating the oxygen you need, and that's what leads to these hypoxic events that often occur during the hottest times of the year, when oxygen solubility is also very low. So a grab sample, one of the points I wanted to make is if you go out 4 or 5 times a year and collect oxygen, did you do it on September 6th or did you do it on September 9th? You get a very different answer. Similarly, chlorophyll is variable. So the data on chlorophyll, which is in the next figure, is drawn from the NERR, National Estuarine Research Reserve System-Wide Monitoring Program for WQOIT. And I just chose 2020 because it's got 2 2s and 2 zeros. And so this is the oxygen data over the entire year, chlorophyll data over the entire year. You can see it's quite spiky. And then if we just hone in on 4 days in August, the 14th through the 17th, again, we can see a pattern that varies throughout the day and between days. So if you go out 4 or 5 times a year and collect a chlorophyll sample, as they've been doing in the MEP, did you do it on the 17th or did you do it on the 14th? You get a different answer. And that's the argument for doing these continuous monitoring sondes that will collect data every 15 minutes over an entire season. And you don't even have to be there to take a sample. It's beautiful. You do have to collect the sonde, calibrate it, download it, process the data. So there is labor involved, but that's, and in talking with Jordan, she felt it's very important to have a person who is responsible, but for doing that. But the cost of one of these sondes is not that great. It's about $15,000. Maybe with mooring and everything else, you're up to $20,000. And once you've got it, you've got it. So we have 6 systems. We want to get 2 sondes per. An initial investment and some dedicated equipment would allow us to do this as a town without having to farm out all the, to consulting firm for every single thing. And continue that year after year after year.
Can you scroll?
I can do it. I was moving. You don't have to keep doing that.
I just, you're reading in another page, I just want to make sure he catches up with you.
Okay.
And what is NERR?
National Estuarine Research Reserve. So there's, 23, Jordan? Is
Yeah.
that right? 23
Okay.
NERRs nationwide now?
I think they're more like 29 or something.
Wow, they've added some more.
You had 30 on your,
Okay.
Kristen.
So they've added more since that shows you how long it's been since that. And not only do they collect this data, I think WQOIT has 4 sondes that they deploy in WQOIT. So they've already done WQOIT for us. We don't have to do that. They monitor this. They calibrate the sondes, they do all that good stuff. They even have a weather station to keep track of what the weather's like. All the data is downloaded to a central location. You can go on the web and pull it up. It's beautiful. So we're, I guess, advocating that something like this be done. And by the way, this is not new. Go to Chesapeake Bay system, they're monitoring the James River this way, they're monitoring lots of these systems where they have exactly the same kinds of problems that we have. And then, you know, there's nuance. We could have instruments deployed at 2 depths in deeper systems, or maybe we want them in the upper and lower estuary, one at the Sentinel Station, one near the mouth. And then we talked just kind of, you know, other measurements, that's item 3, that we might consider. Oh, and some, chlorophyll does need to be ground truth. You do need, so you're getting chlorophyll fluorescence with these instruments. You need to go out periodically and collect some samples at the same time that you measure the old-fashioned way, which would be to filter the particulates out and extract the chlorophyll and see how, you know, to calibrate your fluorescence measurements.
Yeah, and I guess I'd say they've been doing that too at Wacoit Bay for many, many years. So you might be able to tell which are the sites that tend to be outside of that range. You know, I think we could, if we decided we needed a station higher up in the estuary and then we'll lower down, you could look and see whether or not that would be really necessary based on the ranges that they get at Wacoit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you might find after doing it for a few years, you know,
Yeah,
there's
it's
a
good
very
enough. Yeah.
robust relationship between the two.
Yeah.
Additional measurements to consider, we talked about benthic metabolism and nutrient flux, which came up just a few minutes ago in Amy's discussion. I just threw this in. I think it could be done maybe every other year. Doesn't probably need to be done every year because it takes some time for these sediments to clean up, burn off, oxidize any organic matter accumulation, reduce their end mineralization rate. Eelgrass mapping, we need to coordinate there with DEP, which apparently does it routinely.
How do they do it?
I think through aerial surveys.
Yeah.
So the question is, if we simultaneously, when they were doing an aerial survey, did at least one system where, you know, for ground truthing, we might allow us to, you know, better coordinate, better calibrate their measurements. And then there were some names bannered about as people who you might contact who are responsible for these surveys. We talked a little about using sediment profiling. So there is a method that's been developed where basically you take a camera system, drop it on the sediment surface. It has a little wedge-shaped glass face that drives into the sediment. You get a photo of what the sediment profile looks like. And that's been used for these kinds of surveys in the past, and you can get the depth of the redox potential discontinuity, which gives you the sort of where it becomes sulfidic. This is from the website of Inspire, which is one of the companies that does this routinely. Calculate organism sediment index, whatever that is, presence of epifauna, infaunal successional stage, superficial microbial aggregations, and look for evidence of excess organic loading. So this is, again, probably a one-day survey where they drive around and drop this thing at a bunch of locations. And I have no idea what it would cost. But there are, it's sort of interesting, cameras are manufactured in Falmouth, or in Pocasset, I guess, so they're manufactured locally. And CNR Environmental does the surveys, so, and they're local as well, they're in Falmouth. So, that potential to take advantage of some local resources there. And then I talked a little about new technologies, because we have folks at Hui developing instrumentation that could be deployed that, like the SONS, records oxygen change, but it does it in isolated water parcels. So allows you to look at just what's happening in the water column versus what's happening in the entire system. I mean, that maybe is a nuance, but I just threw it in here for fun. And that's kind of where we are on the discussion.
That's good. That's good. Thank you for taking the time to delve into this. I start with the first line that says, Amy, in your budget, you currently have 25 or 30 for doing some stuff having to do with sampling or monitoring. And early on, when we said we had 14 estuaries, we thought that number would go up. So I think this helps to start putting a roadmap out there for what you need to be considering in your line item budgets, not for obviously a week from now, but going forward.
Right, from a budgetary point of view, I feel like if you're spending millions and millions of dollars on infrastructure, certainly spending hundreds of thousands, if not even $1 million, on monitoring over some period of time is worthwhile.
Yeah, I think we all know that having at least some form of a budget that's different, even if it goes from 20,000 to 100,000, you need to be making your case well ahead of time before you actually put it into your budget.
Yeah, it's in the operating budget, and it's under the lab budget for the wastewater plant, wastewater system.
Sure.
And right now, it's $25,000 to $30,000. I can't remember which. I think it's 30. And it's just what we do for that is the summer water quality sampling that SMAS does, and it's only for the South Coast ponds plus Oyster Pond and West Falmouth Harbor. The Buzzards Bay Coalition does surface water sampling on the Buzzards Bay side.
Right.
And
they may start to do SON deployments because they're starting to work on that.
right, good. They have, and they do also they do water collection out in Buzzards Bay, but they, I'm forgetting the name of the organization. There is an organization that they introduced me to that does the same kind of work out in Vineyard Sound. So there
Center
is,
for Coastal Studies.
right. So there is Vineyard Sound, DO and chlorophyll data as well.
But any measurements like this that are done should be done in the context of the regulatory environment, right? We don't want to just be collecting data for fun.
At some point, we are going to be submitting watershed plans, and we're going to describe the monitoring and how we're going to do the monitoring.
Right.
And this helps to give us a good outline for what we might want to include in that plan.
But it goes to the stuff you were talking about, which is let's get DEP on board as to what would be acceptable.
Well, these are standard protocols, and I think if we can certify and sign off that in terms of a paper trail and competency of whoever's doing whatever analysis is being done, I think it's acceptable. I've read some of their reports before where they've done the benthic work and everything was done QPAP or whatever you want to call it.
QAP.
QAP, yeah. Anyway, yeah, I don't think they're gonna have somebody come in and watch your lab procedure and say.
No, it's not that. It's that you're not collecting extraneous data just because it'd be fun and interesting.
Right.
You're collecting data that helps document that the work you did to remediate had a beneficial effect and met some criteria.
Ed, any comments?
There's a lot of interesting science experimentation, data gathering that we're talking about. The numbers, I mean, you talked about two of these Sundays per estuary times 6, you know, and let's call it 50 grand per estuary. All of a sudden, you're $300,000.
It's one-time investment.
Yes, but it's something floating out there, and, you know, it's a $300,000 number. That is not chump change anymore.
No.
You know, Amy's got a budget of 25 or 30 grand, suddenly we're talking 10 times that just for those devices, let alone the constant labor monitoring, installation, taking them out, recalibrating and all that stuff. So it's not a cheap project.
I agree.
Labor intensive, there's opportunities maybe to utilize, I know you've used grad students and stuff. I know they've got an environmental program up at Upper Cape Tech, and they would love to be getting involved in some of this
Interesting
stuff. You know, it's a turnover of labor at students, but there is a teacher contact that I got a while ago that's, yeah, hey, we could maybe get involved in some of this kind of stuff. But, you know, you've got to come up with a budget that's supportable and approved, and, you know, it's a lot of money. And we're talking, I understand your point of, you know, if we're gonna be spending, you know, 30, 40, 50 million dollars to put in some sewers, it'd be nice to know, did it work? What's the goal? Did we get there? Does DEP agree? And is the water getting better?
Right.
Bottom line, that's
And
what
the
we're
other,
trying to
the
get
other
to.
point is, instead of spending 80,000 in one summer on one, you know, consulting firm driven project and not taking ownership of those sonds that they put up, you would own them. And so Jordan, what did it cost, you think, for Webner to maintain 4 sonds over a season? How many people?
So the coordinator, the water quality sort of monitor at Wacoit Bay, it's pretty much a full-time job, the sonds and nutrient sampling. The couple of things that I would say is, I think with the chlorophyll fluorescence probe, we're probably looking at close to 20 grand per instrument, like with the suite of probes. And then in addition to that, probably any moorings or whatever, you know, PVC, blah, 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 you wanna put out there to station it. There are maintenance costs that we have to think about. So, you know, some of the probes, need new membranes, and they need to be, you know, sent in to YSI to be, you know, checked on a every other year sort of basis. The probes, you know, break and die, and you have to replace them. So, you know, I don't have those numbers off the top of my head anymore, but, you know, it's an easy thing to look up and find out. I want to say that our budget for like maintenance and things like that at Webner was like $8 grand a year, something
So
like that.
rather than trying to do this while we're sitting here,
Yeah.
you guys did a great job. I would challenge you for the next round of this to take
Come
what
up
you've
with
got in
some
front of
costs.
this. And, you know, say, you know, these are the steps that we would suggest that the town needs to get a capital appropriation to buy this, they need to do this, and then they need to, in today's dollars, however you want to state it, you know, this is what we project for things, because we're jumping around a little bit here in terms of this, but, you know, do we get 2 1 year, 2 the next, you know, just make a plan and put some cost numbers next to it.
Yep.
And then we can, you know, work with that, and then maybe become some type of motion that we do, where we say, we've looked at monitoring, and we suggest this is the plan that we should propose to the DEP on our watershed plans, and that these are the costs that we anticipate the town will have. So if we schedule it maybe a month from now, I think, you know, there's no pressing need to get it out tomorrow or anything. Go ahead, Steve.
Jordan took some of the words out of my mouth. I was gonna say there's maintenance, vandalism, insurance, and obsolescence. And, if you don't own it, you can get the latest one next year. And the other thing that
They
I
do have
think
rental programs for these.
that hope is a little more useful, just because something measures something every 15 minutes, And because the variable changes over the year, and day to day and hour to hour, doesn't mean that you have to measure every 15 minutes of every year. So a given sonde, depending on the labor cost, could be moved around, could be a week. You could say have 4 estuaries per sonde and do the first week of the month in one, the second week, and so on.
Yeah.
And you know, just intuitively, that that's just as good data as measuring those other 3 weeks too. And
Yeah, it depends on
and a
the
good
weather.
statistician could figure it out for real. But then on the groundwater monitoring, I would be concerned about, actually from seeing your data around Little Pond, and I think you'd agree with it, what I'd call the spatial noise or variation. That if you only have 1 or 2 places in the ground, and you get some variation, you can just see somebody standing up there and say, well, we don't really know why this happened, but maybe that's just a weird place in the ground. And if you have to say that, what are you saying? And if the alternative is a measurement out in the pond at the Sentinel station, which is the bottom line for DEP, and it's mixing it all together and averaging it, I'd want to see a really good case why, what the groundwater adds to it. And then finally, for all of this, I don't have to tell anybody in this room that I'm a strong fanatic of, you watch the pennies and the dollars take care of themselves. And you guys know way more about this technically than I do, but I don't see an actual case made here to convince me, let alone the man in the street, how each of these help us make decisions. In other words, if you said, and by the way, if we measure this and it's here, then we know, on a certain year, we know we've done enough. If it isn't here, we know we need to do more, or we've done too much.
So in the case
And
of,
that's not as much fun, but that's making the actual sales case for it.
in the case of Little Pond, we put in a dozen wells. Each well has 3 to 5 depths that's sampled. So you end up with 40-some water samples.
And you're proposing that many for all the other estuaries?
That's what was done at a cost of less than $10,000, okay? And you collect twice a year, not a big deal, doesn't take a lot of labor. You spend about 2 weeks analyzing the data. The nutrient levels you measure in surface water have almost nothing to do with the inputs. The surface, as soon as those nutrients enter the pond, they are taken up. Surface water nutrients are 0 in the summer, in the water column, in the salty portions of the estuary. There's almost no ammonia, there's no nitrate that can be measured. It's all being used by the organisms.
This is
So this
good.
is
Now you're
giving
really
you-
educating me.
This is
Okay.
giving you
You
inputs.
need to put that in there too.
You need to know the inputs. And that's what you're determining from measuring stream water inputs and groundwater inputs. Now, when we did the initial measurements in Little Pond, the groundwater nutrient levels were pretty high, and then, over time, we've seen it drop. When we look at what and this is very crude because we just look at the watershed, estimated recharge, and how much fresh water is flowing into the pond, multiplied by the grand average of the groundwater nutrient levels, and we look at how they've changed from 2016 to present, we get a decline of nearly 5,000 kilograms per year of loading. The sewering was supposed to remove 5,000 kilograms of nitrogen from the inputs. So based on just those 2 numbers, and I wouldn't stake my entire life on it, but I think it's a pretty nice coincidence, we say, well, the sewering has worked. We have achieved the goal. Whether the pond itself then shows healthy, eelgrass populations and a rebound in diversity, that's a sort of separate thing from whether we've achieved the reduction mandated by
And
the
that's where your
MEP.
other measurements come
And
in.
that's where the other measurements come in.
Very good.
I just want to go down the line here. John, input?
No, my only comment would be that if you rely, in my limited experience, if you rely on DEP to tell you what you have to do, you're going to wait a long time.
Right, we're trying to get to the point where we're saying, this is what we intend to do.
So.
Is this
You're
acceptable?
much better off, I think, in this community, DEP is going to assume that we have enough horsepower that we're going to come up with a program that is, essentially supplies the data that they need.
Okay.
That's certainly been my experience in working with the Buzzards Bay Coalition, that when we were thinking of the changes that were made to the Ocean Sanctuaries Act and what would a municipality have to do to permit an ocean outfall, that scheme was developed that the coalition sent up to the people at DEP and basically sent up in 2017, and they never have responded to it. So as we develop our plan here, we're following the white paper that the scientific group at the Buzzards Bay Coalition put together as a plan. And I think we're gonna have to do the same sort of thing here. We're gonna have to sit together and say, okay, if we monitor these things over these time periods, this is what we think we need to do. And send it up to them and get them to react to it.
Tom?
First of all, I think the team did a fantastic job of organizing, summarizing, presenting the options here. I think it, my limited experience, it's pretty complete. Echoing Steve's comments on pennies and dollars, as we've already said, the next step going forward is for us to have a pretty good idea what it would cost to do these different things, because always in the real world, it's gonna come down to cash flow and what's available and what we think is worth doing. And I'll let it go with that.
Is there anybody in the audience that cares to comment? Just step up and identify yourself. And while you're walking up there, Kristen, I think we're going to push item 4 to a future meeting. Okay? And cover the update on funding with the remaining time we have. Okay? Unless people want to stay past 6:30, but I would vote against it.
I'm with you.
Good evening, Matt Hanley from Surfrider Foundation. Originally, when this discussion was first started, I put the invitation out to include Surfrider Foundation in cooperation with Water Quality, Buzzards Bay Coalition to get a larger, broader sampling. Jordan, did you talk to Isabella DeFranco, our regional representative, and Patrick Temple from Woodwell? We've, Patrick Temple is our Blue Water Task Force representative here in the Cape and Islands chapter. He works at the Woodwell Climate Control Agency. So you guys did get it. I apologize. I've been out of the picture for a couple weeks. I just had the passing of my mother. Just kind of getting back in with the Surfrider, streams and emails and stuff like that. But we would like to contribute. I did attend the SNEP forum. Andrew Gottlieb, I might be saying his name wrong,
Gottlieb.
from APCC. I know you were in the forum when he was talking about regional cooperation and kind of building a database, so all the agencies here on the Cape could, instead of all of us working separately, and then having, it would be more cost prohibitive if all the Cape agencies were to work together and then have a platform that we could input this data into. And then we get a broader spectrum of what techniques are working on the Cape, how these techniques are improving water quality, and then the sampling, you'd have more data points. I thought it was a great idea. You know, Andrew's kind of been a leader in cooperation here on the Cape with a lot of different organizations. And so, you know, Surfrider Foundation, we're kind of new to this area. We're an international foundation, but, you know, we want to cooperate with, you know, municipalities here on the Cape and other organizations to build a brighter future. So you have Patrick's information.
Yes, and actually, it's funny, I work with Patrick, he's with the Conservation Commission, Conservation District, Cape Cod Conservation District.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think he is at Woodwell, although he might have contacts there.
Oh,
But
okay.
I did meet with them, they were great, and I think we're circling right now on like bringing together contacts on like who we should coordinate with on all these efforts.
Right.
So I'll send you our notes from if I haven't already, I will try to send you those notes from our conversation. We'll
I appreciate that. Thank you,
loop
Jordan.
back in.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep. Jonathan?
John Kaufman, I'm a geologist, some might not consider that a science, but, you know, some do. My question is, you know, in a perfect world, when you measure a baseline, you want to do it before any activities occurring, because you're going to alter the physical, chemical, biological environment in some form. We may not understand it today. But unfortunately, it's a fiscally limited world. So I'd say, what are the case studies out there where similar cleanup efforts have occurred that have identified those key parameters that need to be measured to indicate that you're moving on the path towards success? I mean, surely this is not the first attempt to do this sort of remedial work. Is it nitrogen, or what are the key things? And that should sort of form the priority basis for spending monies on this sort of analytical work, which I think is critical. But, I mean, you guys are the experts, so I would think that's a sort of fundamental literature review step that should be out
I
there.
would say that, you know, a lot of work has been done in the Chesapeake, and there's probably some reasonable case studies that we could look back to if we haven't already. And then the folks on Long Island are doing quite a bit of work, and like I alluded to earlier, they've got they're gonna explain what they've been doing and where they're at with some of their stuff as well. And then, is it next session, we're gonna have folks from Barnstable in here? Yeah, so we've got folks from Barnstable coming in to talk about a project they did with IA Systems, and how they monitored and where they're at and whatnot. So, yeah, we do need to keep looking at other locations. And probably Ken and Jordan, to some extent, skipped over the fact that they've had their noses inside this for so long that they probably are building on what other folks have already done a little bit. Maybe that's not so
Well, I
clear.
did mention at the beginning that this is not a totally
Yeah.
new approach. It's
No, I'm
been
just-
used in the
Just saying,
Chesapeake.
as we put together a presentation on monetary and budgetary needs, we probably need to indicate that we're not inventing the wheel, we're, you know, tuning the spokes.
There you go.
Yeah, well, thank you. And again, I think getting a baseline is critical because you only have one opportunity to get a
Right.
baseline.
Now, that's a really good
All
point. That's a really good point, is you don't want to, you'd like to have a few years of monitoring before you do the sewering. And one of the neat things about, from where I sit, about the whole thing in Falmouth is just that we're kind of marching down these replicate ponds on the south shore, one by one, are going to get remediated. So it's a perfect experiment. At, you know, expensive experiment, but
I need to wrap this up because we're gonna run out of time, and Kristen needs to talk about a certain funding opportunity that she's looking into a little bit, because we will need to get onto a selectmen's agenda for this funding. And so I wanted to give her an opportunity to cover that. So I'll entertain a motion to pass on item 4.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded.
And move it to another meeting. So now we move on to item 5, update on funding opportunities. And Kristen said she had an idea to pitch. It's the 604B grant, which is currently open. And she thinks that some of the stuff we're doing might be applicable. This does impact Amy's operation somewhat if we go after it, so what I'm going to be looking forward towards at the end of this is a motion to allow Kristen to continue to pursue this and put this together, and then it would be subject to a meeting between Amy and Kristen and probably myself about taking it to the selectmen. Okay?
So, Kristen Ratherton, Science Wares. We have talked about the 604B funding in different capacities over the last couple of meetings. The call is open. We've looked at how we could fit potentially urine diversion or PRBs, types of things, into the sister program. The 604B and the 319 grant funds are through DEP, their water quality and watershed monitoring program. So the 604 is the planning side. It is a grant specifically to either determine the extent of your pollutant, develop your TMDL, or develop plans on how to restore it. So directly from the website for the call this year, for this year's award, their priority focus, several bullet points, developing plans. But new to the program this year is the regional scale watershed planning, specifically for the restoration of nitrogen impacted waters. So that's specifically targeted for Cape Cod. So it is a call out to this region to try and apply for these funds. Historically, these funds have been prioritized for stormwater, runoff, agricultural, and there's a lot of hurdles if you're in an MS4 area. You cannot seek these funds or 319 funds, depending what your MS4 permit says. So there is a lot of, the Cape hasn't gotten many of these funds in the past. For this year's call, there's about $900,000 in available funding. From the program managers, they anticipate awards being anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000, but they have not set a maximum that you can request for the awards. New this year is that there is no match required. DEP has come up with the match requirement, but obviously if you bring match to the table, that makes a stronger award, stronger proposal. It's a 2-year funding period. The proposal deadline is May 8th. As I said on the last slide, one of the priority projects is the regional scale watershed planning, which includes developing a comprehensive wastewater management plan, CWMP, the targeted watershed management plan, and watershed-based plans. So those are all 3 very different and very specific plans. The watershed-based plan is an EPA requirement. They have a set of criteria that has to be specifically covered in that plan. And to be eligible for the 319 funds, which is the implementation part of the watershed program, you have to have that watershed-based plan approved by EPA. So that 319 grant, as I just said, that is the implementation projects. For non-point source. And for this year, there's only one town on Cape that has a watershed-based plan approved, and I think that was out in Brewster many years ago. But in this year's call, they have said that the program was updated in June to expand the range of eligible projects to include restoration of water bodies in nitrogen-impacted areas. And their priority projects for this round include installation of enhanced IA systems, installation of permeable reactor barriers, and restoration of inland and coastal wetland areas. Again, to be eligible to even apply for these projects, you have to have that watershed-based plan approved by EPA. But what I wanted to highlight is that there is a pot of money now that is being directed towards some of the implementation efforts that this town needs to do. So to be eligible for it, you need to get the plans out there. So, at this stage, the planning grant is something that the town could consider. We know that the town has submitted their notices of intent to apply for watershed permits. So to do that, that's gonna need a watershed management plan. A lot of CWMPs, TWMPs have all of the requirements for the watershed management plan. That's specific to the watershed permit application. So it shouldn't be significant effort for the town to add the necessary elements to their existing CWMP or TWMPs for the estuaries that have that. So the watersheds that currently have the approved plans, West Falmouth, Little Pond, Great Pond, Green Pond, Bourne's Pond, Wacoit Bay. Wacoit Bay, as the sewer area gets planned, that's gonna require a different level of planning. The watersheds in Falmouth that do not have approved CWMP, TWMP, or watershed management plan: Falmouth Harbor, Oyster Pond, Quistit, Wild Harbor, Fiddler's Cove, Rance Canal, and Mgmt. There is a draft CWMP that has been prepared for Oyster Pond, but it has not been submitted. So of these estuaries, the watersheds where nitrogen reductions are primarily going to be addressed through IA systems are these blue ones: Quistit, Fiddlers, Rance, and Mgmt. So the idea that I came up with was to work with the town to submit a proposal to develop basically a TWMP that would include all the required elements needed to apply for a watershed permit down the line, and simultaneously put those elements in that watershed-based plan required for the 319 funds together for Mgmt, Fiddlers, and Rance as one document. So why those three? Because of the interconnectedness of them. Fiddler's Cove, Rance Canal, both empty into the outer basin of Mgmt. In the 208 plan, they were all actually lumped together initially. The MEP separated and put Fiddlers and Rance in one plan and separated Mgmt and Squetique together. Mgmt, the Sentinel Station, has actually been meeting its threshold nitrogen concentration for several years, so the actual implementation in there should be low. Squetique, up near Squetique, there is some work that the town could do as far as where the sub-embayment watershed lines are. Other things to consider: if the award was funded, putting a TWMP together does not affect the planned timing for actually applying for a watershed permit. What it does is it puts the pathway in front for the town to be able to potentially seek other funds that are being directed towards some of these implementation efforts. The 604 grant period is 2 years, so a plan could be developed by fall of 2026, because contracts start in the fall of this year. So that would be in time for the spring 2027 call. By this time, Nitro may have general use approval. Their 50th system was installed in summer of 2022, so 3 years of data puts them at summer of 2025, the earliest for general use approval. I don't know where Nitrex is in the system. That also gives a couple more years for an RME to be more robustly established, and see how that shakes out with the county. If water quality decides that they want to pursue this, this is something that has to go for select board approval. So that's why we're here tonight.
Thank you, Kristen. So this is an opportunity to get a grant and get needed data. Kristen's willing to pull a lot of this together.
Right.
So I think it's a reasonable use of her resources, and I like the Mgmt one because it kind of touches upon an intermunicipal agreement we'll ultimately have to do with Bourne as well, because a portion of that watershed is in Bourne. So,
Did I understand you to say that ultimately that funds might then be available to support a innovative alternative systems?
So if,
And those, I mean, how
with
does
the
that work?
plan, then you can apply for the 319 program, which is a larger pot of money. And the 319 program wants implementation projects, shovel-ready. They don't want the planning stages, they don't want water quality monitoring for that. So what it does is it makes you eligible to actually try and get money from that pot.
How does that money, who can receive that money? Let me-
Towns.
Only towns. Can towns then disperse it to other entities? I mean,
If you're
If you're- if-
partnering, if you're a partner organization,
What are you proposing?
well, I'm just so, I mean, who's gonna use an IA? It's gonna be, some developer, condominium complex, something, it's gonna be it's not gonna be the town itself, right?
So I don't want to give too much away about it. We're going to have the folks from Barnstable come into our next meeting. The town of Barnstable paid for all of the planning, all of the design, and all of the engineering, and the cost of installation to put in IA systems at 13 homes around a pond.
There you go.
Okay?
Thank you. That's what I
So,
was asking.
If we put this all together and decide, it comes back and says at Rand's Canal, there's 20 homes that should go on an IA, we could then at the next step, turn around and say the town wants to clean up Rand's Canal.
And will help subsidize the
and
construction
we'll
of
Jump
that.
into there.
I just want to correct, it wasn't the town of Barnstable that paid for it, it was Barnstable Clean Water Coalition.
So, I'm sorry, yeah.
Well, even if
So it
we
could be a
ne-
nonprofit as well.
Right.
Not for these.
To seek the
These are all
funds, the
town-owned.
town has to be the primary applicant, but they can partner with other
With a
organizations.
nonprofit. Oh.
So I don't know how it works, but I envision maybe something like the way the grinder pumps, the town purchased and then sold to the homeowner for a certain cost.
I would caution everybody not to get ahead right now. I mean, the issue
Right,
is.
right.
Are we, is this, can I get a motion to ask Kristen to begin pulling together a grant?
So moved.
Seconded.
All those, any
No,
any
you have
further comment?
discussion now.
Any further
we have
comment?
discussion?
Yes,
I
I,
have questions.
yeah, go ahead, Steve.
So let me understand, I mean, even if we never get the 319, the 604 pays for your time essentially.
It helps pay essentially for the development of TWMP.
Right, it's not building anything, it's writing a report that we have to do anyway.
Yep, and you don't have to submit it for your watershed permit application until the town's ready.
Right, so that's a simple gamble calculation that you can figure out, that I assume you've already done, that you have some idea of the odds of winning, what you win and how
Depends
much
how
it
well
costs
Tom
to
edits my
to roll the
proposal.
dice. And probably, it's a reasonable gamble, but it would be nice to have the numbers. But then on the 319, what's the amount of the typical grant? Not the pot of money divided by the number of winners.
So, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, it's 500,000 is the general.
Kind of the upper
max
limit of
out
it.
On the award.
Okay.
Per entity? Oh,
Per award, yes.
Yeah, they're decent sized.
Yes.
All right.
That was the call you were on with Malcolm. That's the 319
Right,
program.
okay. So then, to seg into what Ken is saying on that one, although this doesn't matter, because even if you just get the 304, that's a win for the town.
Yep.
But as far as the I keep forgetting which one comes first.
604 is planning,
Yeah, all right.
319 is implementation.
As far as the 319 goes, the 500,000 for the IAs, by definition, the Nitro E already has general approval at that point, by your assumption.
The hope,
And let's
yes.
hope that the Nitrex does too, so there's some reasonable competition.
Yep.
Or else it's 500,000 per system. And, that's a joke. But that's not an experiment anymore. That's town policy on IAs for that watershed. So if you plan to use it as a subsidy, out of fairness to the other estuaries where there are going to be IAs, the subsidy, the town has to be prepared to make the same subsidy if necessary, from its own funds, not from a grant, because the next time you might not get a grant, right? Otherwise, how do you solve that problem?
Well, we're jumping ahead of
Well, you might
proposal
have-
on the floor, which is, should we go after some 604B money? We were on a call back in January, Kristen and I and a couple of other folks, I think there were 89 people on the call, and there's $900,000 that you can use for planning. And we can't even consider going for the 319 money
Unless
without
we do
the targeted
Right.
watershed plan. So it behooves us, I think, to, hey, why not go after this? Do the planning.
Absolutely.
And I have a question, though. Are you talking just doing this for Mgmt or getting a pot that we can use for developing the plan for other estuaries also?
For this proposal, it would be for the three. Because your watershed-based plan, the one that you need for 319, has to be specific for each estuary.
Right.
So, in the future, you could do for other ones. This is a funding round that comes out annually.
Right.
So if it's successful, it could be a route to help some of the other places where there's planning. And one of the things you can do with the 604 is use that money to basically get your CWMP up to snuff to turn it into the watershed-based plan that they're requiring. That's part of what they say you should use the money for, to help get you to that watershed-based plan to make you eligible for 319.
The new date for submission is May 8th, so I think we should plan on, I'm greatly in favor of doing this, A. B, don't wait for that last deadline. That's the last submission day. Push back the goal to, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before that. Put it together. Let's go for it. If nothing else, it's a learning experience, so next year we can go for more.
This will get driven by the selectmen's agenda.
Absolutely.
We need to, there's gonna be a couple of selectmen's meetings between now and when this goes in, so.
So we're basically voting a recommendation to fund for the selectmen.
Yeah, that we believe that this is a reasonable grant program, we have a reasonable chance of success, and we should not pass up this opportunity and try to get some money.
Put together the proposal and get the
Okay.
selectmen
Call
to
the
say, go
question.
ahead and do it.
Any further comments?
Just one real quick one, because I think it's probably time to call the question. But Kristen, back on the page where you had the call for proposals, farther back, right
Yep.
there, at the bottom line, it says regional scale watershed planning. Why did they put regional in there? Because to me, that implies multiple municipalities or even multiple counties.
So it's basically the way that they are calling out Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, those areas that typically haven't gone for these funds before. When you apply for 319, that plan has to be specifically for the watershed where that implementation occurs.
Okay, so basically, they misstated themselves, there's what you're saying.
Right, because this one, this line, this bullet here includes the development of your CWMP, TWMP, and watershed-based plans. Those aren't on a regional level.
Right, even though that says regional scale, so yeah, I was a little concerned with their use of words there and what they were looking for.
It's the state.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to call the question. I'd like
Motion
to
made and
close-
seconded.
Close discussion and
If
call
you-
the question.
If you were Dave Vieira, he'd say, you can't call the question if you commented on anything first.
Oh, okay, someone else call then.
All those in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, it appears that the ayes have it, and there's no need for a standing vote.
There you go.
Okay, unless a member has a burning need to give a report, we'll skip over that for the time being. Tom?
I have one quick thing to just put this idea in play for a later meeting. Steve forwarded me a message to him from Eric Harpless
Thank you.
about us viewing the oyster aquaculture gear. They're in a stage of transition right now. They're prepping it. Some of it may probably already afloat by now. So what I'm going to do at the next meeting is ask who might be interested in that trip. And then in pleasant, warm weather, I'd like to actually have a field trip out there if we have several people that are interested in seeing it.
Thank you for that.
Out there.
We get to bring back any of the,
Yeah, I mean, last year, we only got 1.4 million, so when you're talking about $18,000 out of 6 million, sure.
One other small item on the selectmen's agenda, Monday night, Amy will be present. There is an intermunicipal agreement that's been drafted between all of the communities that contribute to Quoit Bay, which is a precursor to where we're going. It's nothing major or controversial in it, but it's been reviewed by town council, and that's just keeping that side of the thing we're moving. So in case you study selectmen's agenda and see it pop up, that's basically what it is. Tom, I think you went to a couple of the early working group meetings on that? Did you go? Yeah, you went, yeah, so. All right, minutes of the prior meeting, I've read them, I have no comments.
They were wonderful.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Tom.
I'll move they be accepted as presented.
Is there a
Second.
Okay, is there any further discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 I'll abstain, I wasn't here.
Thank you, John.
Also abstain here.
You are an abstemious character, aren't you?
This is small.
And lastly, I guess all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
we did
You
that.
can't say aye, you weren't here.
Oh, I thought you were on to adjournment.
No, I didn't call for the vote on the minutes.
I thought you were
All
being funny.
abstaining. Adjourn, motion?
Adjourned.
Okay.
Seconded.
All right. Made and seconded. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you.